Today, we are going to be talking about some new-ish research around how careers and career clarity creates satisfaction and career confidence, which we love, right? And we have a special guest here with us today, Susan Critton, who is a writer, the author of Personal Branding for Dummies, and also a master personal branding strategist and the instructor for our certified personal brand strategist program. So thanks for joining us today, Susan.
Great. Thanks, Marie. Always happy to
Yeah,
be here with you. So, yeah, great.
I know. So we go live every Tuesday to talk about the trends and what's going on in the world. And there was some research that came out just last week, I believe, from the University of Phoenix around career clarity. And, I just love to get your thoughts on that. I know you've checked it out.
So, on the career clarity piece, it's an interesting thing. I get into a lot of conversations with people about personal branding, and they often really think it's this place about how do I look on social media and how do I, do my social branding, and that is a piece of it if you choose to go there. So, um, what I think personal branding really is really that piece around clarity of who you are as a person. And our world is so volatile now as far as the workplace. And certainly my generation, it was that place about if you worked hard and you did the right things, your company would keep you forever. And I watched my dad in his 50s get laid off. And he was he was a geologist in an oil company. So he had a pretty senior level intellectual job. And there was like he didn't know what to do with himself. And I think that when I think about clarity, now to me, what that means is that if you know who you are, what you have to offer, what your skill sets are, you can better control where you go with your career and how you talk about it with other people.
Yeah, and I love that, the power of knowing who you are,
Mhm.
and we kinda take that for granted. Don't I think most people think they know who they are, but then they come to
Mhm.
work with us.
Yeah, it was interesting. Last week, I did a workshop on strengths with a pharmaceutical company. And one of the women in the group said, "Oh my gosh, this is like so glaring at me about my deficiencies." And so we actually had a pretty good discussion in the group about, is that really a deficiency or is that something that you just don't sell about yourself? And in her case, she was very strong strategically in relationship building, but had no executing. And she said, "Well, that's why I set up all these systems." And I said, "Well, the key for you is not to end up in a job that you're executing all day long."
Right,
Right.
it doesn't mean you can't do it, it's just not your strength.
Right, and that was, a piece for her that was a big aha moment because she said, "I think I knew that about myself, it's just so glaringly in my face right now." And and she said, and yet sometimes I'll still talk about when I sell myself, it's that place about, "Oh, here's all the things I do."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and we all have strengths, we all have
Mhm,
areas that we're working on, and our clients do too, and
mhm,
this article was talking about how understanding that piece and feeling like we have control, and I kinda took it back a step, right?
mhm,
Because you can't
mhm.
feel like you have control if you don't know who you are. If you don't know who you are,
Right,
you can't
right.
be in control.
Um and there was actually an interesting, I'm paraphrasing it, so kind of quote. It says, personal brands don't make you indispensable, in this, but when you know yourself, you can navigate the world of work differently. So I think that there's that fallacy of, oh, if I'm selling myself in, and there's really, we can get into a whole conversation about, is it, I think a lot of people view personal branding on the outside, and it's really much more of an inside job as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, right. But I do think that when you know yourself well, you can navigate in a different way. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a million opportunities around that. But I also think you can find the better fit. You can ask better questions. You can represent yourself in a way that is more compatible with where you're going to be successful.
I love that, so that when we know ourselves, we can navigate in a different way, and, we talked a little bit about, I realized in my write-up I put the Wall Street Journal, but it was actually the New York Times
Mm,
that had this article late last year talking about how people that were building a personal, they said personal
yeah.
brand, people that were building a personal brand were burned out. And really, personal branding does the opposite of burn
Mhm,
you out because
mhm.
it's about aligning with your strengths, aligning with your natural energy. Um, and so that article wasn't talking about personal branding.
No, matter of fact, that was a little bit about where what I was just quoting was that the article you're just now mentioning. And I think a piece of that is, and what I got from the article is people were so busy putting all their personal things on there saying, well, if I have my personal brand, it's like everything about me. And it doesn't, personal branding does not mean tell all. It does, I don't think anybody wants to know every single thing about all these people out there. It's just too much for us to handle. Um, but what I do think is important is if you're when you've really got a strong personal brand, you're sure of your core, and it shows up differently in different places. Like how it shows up for me, in my community, it is um, it's going to be geared in a different way than it is when I do my work, but I'm still the same. Like nobody would say I'm that different. I used to, one of the places I used to really observe this was I did a lot of work as a volunteer in my community. And I would often say, boy, that's a person I'd never want to work with in the workplace because they were such a terrible volunteer. And I figured that's going to follow them wherever they go. I mean, so part of the personal brand where I do agree with it is people make assessments and judgments about you in all walks of life. And so you do need to be thoughtful about how you show up wherever you show up.
And you can be thoughtful and authentic when you really know what that core is. And that's one
Mhm,
of the like kind of duplicitous pieces of it is that yes, we do want to think about how we're perceived and to show up
mhm,
in a way that is how we want to be perceived, but that only works if it's also authentic to who
right.
we are. And so there is both pieces of it, but it doesn't work unless they are similar. They don't have to be
Mhm.
the same, but unless they're similar and really come from that core that you're talking about.
So, to your comment about people feeling burned out, I think they're burned out in a way trying to maintain an image that they've deemed as their personal brand, right?
Yeah, and trying to make money off of that in a
Mhm.
forceful way. And I interviewed Sarah Jane Vandenberg yesterday on my radio show, and she was talking about how doing a job to attract money instead of
Mhm.
doing a job to earn money, and I was like, "Ooh, I like that," right? So
Mhm.
that instead of
Mhm.
making it this arduous process, it's what could I do that adds value to the world in a way that it would attract money back to me?
Mhm.
And I love that language.
Mhm.
Sounds like you've heard that too.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. I had a client that we were talking about what does wealthy mean? And so in her and in a lot of what you just said, she has been chasing how to make a living as an entrepreneur for many years instead of again attracting the right kind of people, and that was a big part of our discussion. And it moved into, well, I'd like to be wealthy, and then I said, well, what does that mean to you?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's always been my favorite part about personal branding is from the very beginning, it differentiated that when you're selling, you're pushing,
Hmm.
when you're branding, you're attracting, you're pulling because people see that you know who you
Hmm.
are. And I find that most people want to know who they are, and they
Right.
think they do until they see somebody else that does. And then
Hmm.
they're like, "Wait, that looks good." And so that's very attractive when someone is
Hmm.
really comfortable and confident in who
Hmm.
they are.
It was even funny when I can't believe I'm kind of telling this story, but I will. When I wrote the book, is that one of my colleagues said, you should be out there promoting even more. I mean, you just wrote this book on personal branding. And I said, that's so, the hard thing is that's not me to go out and do this big mega sweep of things. Um, and the book's done very well. Like I'm very pleased with it, the number of people it's reached and how many people it's helped. but I didn't feel the need to promote me. And I remember, actually taking a lot of flack from a couple of my colleagues about, you're not doing this right and you should be out there promoting more. And I'm like, but that's just not really who I am.
And I think that's the challenge. So that's the
Mhm.
burnout piece that they're
Yeah.
talking about, is that we do have to find a way to communicate our strengths, to communicate
Mhm.
our brand in a way that is aligned with who we are.
Mhm.
And so for people to, I mean, everybody's got to choose their own path, but if
Mhm.
you're wanting to promote your book or you're wanting to get more visibility for your job, then you've got to figure out, okay, based on who I am and how I operate and what my strengths are, how will I do it in a way that works for me, but
Mhm.
still achieve that goal? It sounds like that you didn't really have the goal, so it didn't matter. But if you had
Well,
had the
no,
goal of
but
getting the
but I
book,
I
so
I
better.
will back up. I mean, because what I did have and what I enjoy is I enjoy getting out and talking to people. So I
Right.
did that a lot. I
Yeah.
was on author calls, I was out doing a lot of public speaking, I spoke to tons of groups, colleges, because I actually really like the interaction. And so for me, that worked for me. It was personal, it was connective. Those are things that about who I am. And by luck, I think, it's that the word of mouth spread on that. So for me, just like make it being so that worked for me and my personality.
Yeah.
So it
And what
wasn't
I
like I
think,
didn't do anything. I actually did what I enjoyed, which is to get out and connect with people. Yeah.
yeah, and what that New York Times article was talking about is kind of that people doing what they think they should do
Mhm.
in to promote their brand or whatever, instead of people figuring out what really comes from their core and works
Mhm.
for them. And that's
Mhm.
part of what you
Mhm.
talk about in the class and with the communication wheel and everything, is that there's a ton of different ways to do it.
Mhm.
You've just gotta find your way.
And I watch my niece is kind of and I don't know if she's an influencer, but she has a lot of Instagram followers and she's on and it's great. I mean, she's doing all that, but I think okay, she's 26, I think, and and she's really promoting the way she likes to promote in her generation, in her group of people. And so I do think that there is that place about how do you stay current, how do you use current methodologies and things like that and still be you. I mean, because ultimately what personal branding is, it's you and your story and how are you sharing that in an authentic way.
And how does it connect to your audience? Sometimes I say add value, and I know that phrase has been
Mhm,
overused, but it's really that sweet spot, right? Of it's
mhm,
about you, but it's also gotta engage the people that you want to engage.
mhm, mhm. And you've done, I think just observing you, you've done a really amazing job with the way that works for your personality, and you are always up on the latest everything, and I think the way you share that has just been very true to you and always feels really authentic, and at the same time really cutting edge. So it's been fun to watch you.
Oh, thank you. I love someone said this for you, Susan, I believe you created your own luck by being who you are.
Aw, thank
Yeah.
you. That was
And
nice.
that's what we're yeah, and that's what we're trying to do with clients, right? Is
Mhm,
help them attract those opportunities by being who they are. I love
mhm,
that.
mhm.
And
I mean, here was an example, and I would say a piece that I think people that know me know this about me is that I consider myself a generous person. And when the book went from the first edition to the second edition, I called the publisher and I said, "Well, what do you do with the extras?" And he said, "Well, we pulp them." And I said, "You just like crush them up." I was just about right. And I said, "What if I give them away to some nonprofits, to groups of that might enjoy that?" And they said, "Yes, but you have to pay the shipping." I go, "Totally fine with that." And they sent me, I think, about 160 books. I think that's how many I got. And I distributed them to a bunch of nonprofit groups around here in the Bay Area. And, so again, that's really different than social media, but that worked for me.
Right. And you could, you can duplicate that. So we have a
Mhm.
question. Yay, thanks for asking a question. Tips for young people starting to build their personal brand. Thanks, Betsy.
Well, and by all means chime in, Marie, on this, is that again, I think that our who we are, we're discovering it our whole lives. So it is an ongoing process. It never ends. We're always discovering new things about ourselves. But what I would say is to, even at that age, there are things about a person that they have already emerged, and have already shown up about who they are and what's authentic to them. And so I would use that and I would think about that. And that's where having a really good career counselor is helpful, to start to look at where do those patterns fit in the world and who's going to love that about you. So I think that the tip, for young people really is start to look at the things that you do well, that you enjoy, and who would like that about you. And I think that's a really good starting place. And by all means,
Yeah,
you know.
I love that. And personal branding to me is a very powerful process
Mhm,
for this age group
mhm.
because it is more about who you are than what you've done. And a
Yes.
lot of the other career things, resumes, and all
Mhm,
those get into what you've done, where
mhm,
personal branding is really about who you are. And you can, as you said, you can tease that out from volunteer experiences, class projects, limited work experience, even just interactions in the classroom or whatever. You can help them tease out who they are, what their
mhm,
strengths are, who they, and maybe a little bit of who they want to be or who they're
mhm,
becoming in addition to that. And then you can kind of go out and find experiences that back those things up. So
mhm,
you told me that you take initiative. Tell me about a time that you took initiative. But now we're doing it from this inside out way instead of the outside in.
yeah.
This is a requirement for this job. This is a requirement for that job. We'll get to that
Mhm,
later, but that can put us in a position of feeling like we don't have enough because we don't meet all those
mhm,
qualifications
mhm.
versus when we do personal branding and we start from the inside out, you're telling me what you are, and I'm asking you for examples of that. And to me, it's a lot more empowering.
Well, and I think too, I mean, I look at my sons who are now grown men, and I think there's been a pattern since they were little kids, right? About who they are. I mean, my oldest son was like the head crossing guard, and so he was the leader of all the crossing guards for the fifth grade, and he's always been Mr. Safety in every like baseball team, every group that he's been. And he just has now started a security company, a commercial security company. It's like such a fit in that the core of him is he wants to make sure people feel safe, right? He could have probably gone down the whole being a police officer path as well. And I think that's a piece that often people don't realize, is that the work part is always evolving, but some of those core patterns are really so strong that it's almost really more of a question about where do I want to use them, or which direction do I point them in now.
Right. And Betsy
Mhm.
said that sometimes students have a hard time identifying those things that they're good at, and that can definitely be true, and
Yeah.
that's where you get into looking at the patterns and the times that they've really enjoyed or had success or all of those pieces, pulling it
Mhm.
away from work. I find people have the most trouble when you're trying to connect it to work because they feel like they've never worked. But if you
Right,
take it
right.
away from work and you just look at patterns of what's been successful, what's been fun, what's
Mhm.
been, then you can see those patterns like your son's security. That's so cute, right?
Mm,
But if you put
yeah,
that in a work setting when he was 18, it would not have come there. But if you
right.
took it out of the work setting and just asked about the patterns of what he's done and what he's enjoyed,
Mhm.
that might have emerged a
You
little
know, and I
bit.
think because our field is, I still think of our field as almost a relatively new field. It's certainly in my lifetime, it has really emerged. For me, it was not a question of who I was. It was like, how do I use this in the world? That was where my confusion came from. And really that piece of personal branding is about helping people start to at least identify the patterns and look at where that can be most useful, because there really is a place for all of us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and I was thinking that, I mean, we're starting this 360 Reach class tomorrow, but that's also another part that can help people get, like you were
Mhm.
his mom. So you say,
Mhm.
oh, I've seen this pattern about you.
Mhm.
So
And
when,
I'm a career counselor, so
right,
I'm good at seeing patterns, right?
right.
Most yeah.
But yeah, but I see that if your person is struggling with figuring out their strengths, I mean, they can
Mhm.
do an assessment like the Strengths Finder, which is
Mhm.
great, but they could also do some kind of activity or this more formal 360 where they ask other people, what do
Right.
you see as the themes in my success? Or what have you always
Mhm.
seen me to be good at? Or some of those questions
Mhm.
that help people get a little bit more global perspective of what their strengths are.
Right, and I think that what I often find with people when they take that is that a little what I often hear is a little bit of a surprise and at the same time of, "Oh, already really knew that about myself, I just don't say it out loud."
Right.
Yeah, and so I think sometimes it's just a very, affirming place to hear what it is that others see in you that you may not recognize or, talk about for yourself.
Right. And then the other thing, I'll bring this up. So this is what we look at in the 360 reach, or sorry, not in 360 reach, in the
Mhm,
certified personal brand strategist.
mhm,
We look at all of these areas, interest, strengths, values, differentiators that connects to the target audience, purpose, and goals, and then figuring out those external perceptions and really that you can't light up, right? These
mhm,
aspects of us can't light up unless we find the right place to plug in.
mhm,
And so thinking about the light bulb analogy in that way that we can figure out the stuff about ourselves, but then as you said, we've got to figure out how to operationalize it, right? Bring it into the
mhm,
world in a
mhm.
way where it attracts us an income, make or people that we want to be around, all of the things we get at work besides income as well.
Mhm.
That's really what the personal brand program is all about.
Right, and a big piece is, like we were just talking about, is looking at what are some of the patterns that if you really look deep enough, you'll see these show up over and over again in your life. Most people just don't look at it and most people just don't connect it. I mean, even one the other day, for as long as I've lived on this planet, I said to my husband, I don't know why I never connected this dot. When I was 10, I had lived in New Mexico and I really didn't know how to swim. I played around in the pool, but I didn't really know how to swim till I moved to California and my mom put me on swim team. And 4 years later, I was teaching swimming lessons to all the city reject kids that couldn't be in a group lesson. And I said, so the pattern is that I like to learn things and I like to turn around and use them. And that pattern has been with me my whole life. That I
Hmm.
never I'm like, there was an example even at that young age where I did the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
And I
all,
think
yeah, like you said, we all have those examples.
And that's going back to that question from Betsy about, helping a young person is just start to notice some of the patterns. And a lot of times it's so obvious if you look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And help them find other people that can help them look too.
Mhm,
I think that's really helpful because sometimes we only see the negative, especially if we've been, we've had some
mhm,
challenges. And so other people might be better at helping us see the
mhm,
positives.
mhm.
Um, eh, and most of our behaviors could be negative and positive depending on
Right,
who's,
right.
who's judging that at the moment. So I was saying yesterday that you know this, Susan, I think my kids talk all the time, and I talk on my classes, but I don't really
You're
talk
pretty
much
quiet.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my kids learn to fill that space, and they fill it very well, and, we've decided to encourage their talking all the time because they wanna start a YouTube channel, so they're gonna
Mm,
start a fishing outdoor adventure channel for kids. And now I can encourage them to talk to the camera nonstop. And I got to tell you that they're not going to have any trouble with that. And so it's, I could criticize them for always talking,
mhm, mhm,
which fortunately I probably do more than I should. Or I could say, okay, let's do something with this. And
mhm.
they're interested in it. So they want to make videos and start a YouTube channel. Why not? It is their strength.
Right.
Their strength is storytelling and talking.
And to that point, of course, I was more of a talker. So I remember being in the 6th grade and I would get in trouble, right? Because I'm talking to my neighbor. And back then they put you boy, girl, boy, girl. And I ended up sitting next to every boy in the class. And to this day, like when we see each other at class reunions, it's like from that 6th grade, me making friends with everybody in class because I just was chatting away with them.
Right? Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
probably a pattern that has continued.
I'd love it. And if you're watching this, you're watching the replay, share one of your strengths, share one of your patterns. I think it's fun for us to look at that for ourselves and then to think about how we can help our clients identify for themselves. Because as you said at the beginning, then it's coming from this core. We always talk about strengths being
Mhm,
that kind of life-giving force.
mhm.
And that's where we get the kind of burnout prevention is when you know what that life-giving force is and you seek out those opportunities to do it more, right?
Yeah, yeah, very
Yeah.
good. Well, thank you for
Eh
having me, Marie.
yeah, this was fun.
Yeah,
We'll be back next Tuesday, and we'll be talking about another trendy topic. If you have any topics or questions that we should address, let me know. We've been getting a few of them in our YouTube comments, so go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel, comment one of your ideas, and we've had a few questions on resumes and those things, so as we move into August, we'll start bringing up some of those topics. But if you have any other questions about personal branding, especially, we're gonna be on that topic for the next couple of weeks, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next Tuesday. Thank you, Susan.